Copa America previews have been put on hold and we're returning to domestic action. Now, Cal hasn't joined us, sadly, because he's swanned off to Istanbul and he's left the podcast. But just for a week or two, he will be back. But of course, I'm joined by Peter Pankovski. Peter, it's been a while. How are we doing, mate?
Yeah, good. Excited to finally see Brazil start. So this is now my waters, as I said, and I'm happy for it. Ecstatic, actually. There's already
Absolutely.
been mad games, anyways. So.
I know it's already started off in the first two rounds, and look, the idea was to get this podcast out just before, but the action has just caught up with us. But there's plenty of players on our radars, which is the main discussion today. Ones to watch in the Brasileirão, from defenders all the way through to attackers. We've listed a couple each. We're going to go through our lists. Some obvious players who we'll mention and ones we can't not help get excited about, but we'll have some others definitely which should be on your radar, and hopefully a few move across to Europe and we can be seen as professional scouts. I'm only joking. But Pete, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you first. We're going to start with defenders and see what we come up with. I've gone for a couple of, I think, slightly edgy picks. One who could really take off, but I'm going to pass the microphone to you first. Who's the first player on your list, one to watch for 2024?
Okay, so you said edgy picks. I'm going to obviously go hipsterish and put in an FM Wonder Kid. But no, jokes aside, this is one hindsight pick. So I'm starting off with my goalkeeper, basically. And again, as I said, it's hindsight a little bit because I think we're pretty much, 2 to 3 months away from the summer transfer window. And I feel like Atletico Paranaense are going to probably sell Bento. And he's already been touted as his next replacement after a few impressive youth games. My pick is obviously Mikhail. He's Atletico Paranaense's current backup goalkeeper. I think he's 19 years of age. And he's kind of shown even bigger promise than Bento because people forget that Bento's, 24 already?
Yeah.
He's outgrown, in a sense, the role where he has to be a backup. And I feel like the reason Paranaense are kind of keen in shopping Bento around, in a sense, is exactly that they have someone who is obviously ready to take the mantle there. And he could even outgrow in terms of not just potential, but profit for the club as well. Because that's what they do. They eventually sell players. And I feel from what I've seen from him, which again, it isn't ideally much, but it's what I could gather obviously from youth games at that level, is he's a very dominant force. He's quite a good goalkeeper. He's tall. He is tall, but he's very quick in order to cut off angles and manage to go down, which is something that usually tall goalkeepers should supposedly struggle with. And when you have someone able to be able to do that is a very big plus, especially when you're a bigger club with the size of Paranaense and in Brazil level. Sorry, I feel he's one that if Bento is sold, you'd eventually hear from him real quick rather than just wait from him to peak. I know Flamengo have had goalkeepers that pop up from the youth teams and people get all excited about them and so on and so on, and they never really capitalized. But I feel Michal could be exactly that for Pranese. I feel he will be one for people to watch, and even be it in say 6 to 12 months time, his name pops up somewhere. It'll be like, yeah, I told you so. I
Yeah.
wouldn't be surprised
No.
at all.
No, a
Um,
lot of Brazilian experts, if you've seen across Twitter, probably we're a lot closer to it than most. But a lot of Brazilian experts are saying, "Oh, you're getting excited about Bento. Well, just
yeah,
you wait to see this kid." And that's when you sort of take note, especially for a goalkeeper. Like, they don't come on that often, do they? But I think the fact that Bento has now obviously got that national team cap, his value's gone up to, I think they want something like between 20, 30 million euros, which is huge money for them. And if they have another keeper who's in a year to 12 to 18 months time, is going to go for a similar fee, like to get 50, 60 million potentially out of two goalkeepers in 2 or 3 year period is huge for them.
yeah, especially as being they're more on the self-sustainable front rather than one of these bigger clubs that is able to actually spend big money and not exactly look for bargains and bringing in youth players on a regular basis. That will be huge. That will be really huge, and especially with Vitor Roque as well, who's left. That they've managed to scout well and integrate well. That's one of the things I really like about Premez, to be honest, and which is why I'm so confident in him producing if he's eventually given the chance that I expect if Bento is to depart. Granted, if he doesn't, obviously this pick will be just about there. He might get loaned to, I don't know, well, Juventude got promoted, and that's the first team that came to mind. But Guarani, for example, and he's going to play in the Serie B. But I still watch him though. Like that's just what I do.
You love
So
Serie
yeah,
B, that's why you love Serie B
yeah,
more than most.
that's facts. That's facts. Honestly, Brazil people are just so surprised that a random Bulgarian watches Serie B, but it is what it is. But and my second pick is obviously one that I've raved about before for him, and I was very disappointed with his move to Russia. I think I'm not generally surprised by if people are moaning about it as well. It's Robert Renan from Internacional. I believe he made his move permanent, or was his loan for a year and a half? Like I'm not entirely sure.
It's a loan, which it,
Yeah, it can turn permanent under certain incentives.
oh,
I'm
is it
pretty
okay?
certain about
Yeah,
that.
I knew it was a
I'm
loan for the
pretty
season.
certain.
Yeah, a loan for
He
the
should
season.
stay for the whole Serie A campaign. That's I'm pretty certain because I think obviously Russia has a double January window, whereas a double transfer window, whereas Brazil is more different in a sense. In a sense, they do have doubles,
Yeah,
but
why
yeah,
should people be getting excited about him?
he's one that I feel like the world is at his feet. Like before he left for Zenit, he was a magnificent young defender for Corinthians. Like he was the one. He was Murillo before Murillo became Murillo. So Robert Renan is one that he impressed at the under 21s tournament, the under 20s tournament. Sorry, he he's got everything you want from a defender. Ball playing ability. He's tall. He's quick. He's agile. He's able to outmuscle attackers easily. All of these qualities are combined for a great defender. The question is now whether that move has kind of destabilized his development in a sense. And I feel if he gets his career on track, and especially if you look at the Internacional now who have started a little poorly, they would want to stabilize from the back to front because their front is not entirely ideal. You can see it with their both results have not like won their games. I think it was by a 1 goal margin. So their
Yeah, beat,
struggles in attack are there.
beat
Yeah.
Palmeiras, like whether that was a
No.
one-off or not, it like a decent result. But I get where you're coming from because they've spent. And the question I wanted to throw to you about Robert Renan was the fact that International has spent a lot of money, brought in a lot of players, yet he hasn't started the first 2 or 3 games of the season. And I know it's a long season and I know it's a slog, but I thought he would have come back under the promise that if he's coming back to Brazil, this is like a huge shop window opportunity for him, whether he goes back to Zenit and bosses it or moves elsewhere in Europe. But the fact that he hasn't started in the first 2 or 3 games, it's just, I don't know, it's caught me by surprise.
Yeah, it is putting off a little bit, but he he's still young and he's 21 now, I believe. That in itself is kind of I know people will be eager for him to start like immediately, like get him in, for, at least for the people who've watched him. But that doesn't mean that he won't get the chances over time. People forget Brazil is kind of really hectic with his games. You've got the Libertadores, you've got the Sudamericana, you've got the Cup games. It's almost such a hectic schedule every 3 days. We love it. I love it. Everybody who watches Brazil and South America knows what it's about, so we love it for that. But I think he'll get his chances. The question is really how his development is going because when he was at Corinthians, as I said, that really caught my eye. I was certain he's going to make it to the top, and now it's about getting some stability under his legs, getting the momentum going. And I believe that once that happens, he'll just have to step up with the run of games that he's potentially given. Because the potential for him is there. It's just whether that's a failed move on his career path or not.
I mean, look, it's not the first Brazilian to go across to Russia. A vast majority of them do, which surprises people. But the fact that he couldn't even get a game there, I think he played 4 or 5 appearances,
Yeah,
and it's a sensible decision to come back. Don't get me wrong, really sensible decision, but only if he can get some game time. I put him down in my column for the 10 to watch, so I was on the same page as you. But I have put other people down on my list, and I could be in for a really big shout here, but I'm getting a lot of, well, not under a lot of pressure, but most, say, Forest fans who will speak to me going, where's the next Murillo? Where's the next Murillo? And I don't think there is a next Murillo for a long time. You said there Robert Renan could be, I know he was the one before Murillo. He's the one who's probably going to come out of Brazil next who will be that talent. But something about Douglas Mendes from Bragantino, currently on loan from Salzburg, spent some time in Austria with Lefering, if I've got that completely right. but there's something which really catches the eye, and he's come in and he's started the first 3 or 4 games, played 90 minutes. Now, obviously, we know the Red Bull model is to constantly play youngsters between the age of like 19 up to 23, sell them on, invest, and repeat. And Bragantino's defence is no different this year, and they've already conceded a fair few goals in their opening games. So I was looking at it going, am I judging this guy completely right? But if I had a look across their back line, and they've got Andres Hurtado, Ecuadorian 22, Guilherme Lopez 22, Luan Candido 23. Like, it's a really young defence, and then Douglas Mendes 19 in the middle of that. But if you look at him, it's just the obvious signs that there's going to be a player there who could go and play in European football. He is physically strong. He's pacier than you expect. Like, once you get, it's almost like a bit like a cartoon. Once he gets revving and then he's gone, he's actually really quick, but it takes him a stride or two. But it's not like Nino from Fluminense, for example, where like football intelligence and feet were there, but we were worried about his pace moving across to European football. I think he has that. Played 3 games for Brazil in the Under-20 World Cup. Yes, they didn't go that way, but it just showed like how high his ceiling could potentially be. And he's joined on loan from Salzburg, so it's not like he's been out in Brazil constantly. Like, he's been seen by part of the Red Bull project, and he's come back for the season. I'm not 100% sure if it's just the season of a permanent deal which could be made, but he's played in Brazil. He's done well there, and he's starting now. So yes, he's only about 10 to 12 appearances in for Bragantino. But there's a real player in there, and there's just something which catches the eye. So yeah, this isn't me looking to try and make a claim that, yes, we found the next Murillo or the next Lucas Beraldo. Definitely not. Like, he's still got work to do. He can look a little bit clunky in possession, but his general play isn't that bad, to be honest with you. Aerial presence, really strong, and just physical and quick. And they're just 2 boxes which need to be ticked for a player who can make it across in Europe. So the fact that obviously Salzburg have invested, loaned him out back to Bragantino, all seems to make sense. And if he has a big year, then he could be the youngster out of those 4 mentioned on that back line who steps up and makes the move. So he's my one to watch from being under 20. We've touched on Atletico Paranaense already, and slightly older in terms of like, I'm looking at this player going, there's probably not a European move here. I know every player I want to put across is going to be something, but Lucas Esquivel, 22, left back. There's something which really catches the eye here. I've said in my notes here, because I've made a few notes around him, said he's got a left foot of a winger more than anything. If you go back and watch his performances from last season, he's almost like a set piece specialist, but he's not on set pieces. And when he braves and gets into the box, in and around the box, like, he whips in intelligent balls, and the way in which he recovers the ball, body feints down the channels, like quick feet rolling the ball under his foot. He's really quick at getting away from opposition and getting the ball up the pitch, and a magnificent cross of the ball. But then again, I looked at his stats a little bit further, and last season he had like 1 or 2 assists, which was a little bit worrying. I didn't realise it was that little. When I went back and watched more footage of him earlier today, I was really impressed. And then when I saw the stats, I was like, something doesn't quite add up here. But then in the Sudamericana, yes, it was against a Venezuelan team. He bombed up the pitch. Fernandinho, age 38, 39, still pulling the strings in the middle, found him, and he showed like a really intelligent run and finish. So for me, potentially, he's so good defensively from interceptions, but he shows so much promise going forward. I don't know if it's almost like a Valentin Barco aspect of like, yes, he can play well at left back, but how about we try and further up the pitch? And then that might elevate his career. But for me, it looks like he's going to be a top-end Brazilian player, maybe an MLS shout at one point. There is something in there for me. I just want to see a little bit more from an assist and goal point of view. Like, if he's going to make a big move, he needs to be scoring or producing against teams which aren't just from Venezuela. But it's a bit strong start to the season, and I just like his ability on the ball. I'm always sort of favouring a left footer anyway, and the fact that he can put a ball into the box, I just need to see that a little bit more, to be honest with you. But then he had Vitor Roque a service last season, and if you can't get assists with Vitor Roque up top, then maybe I've read between the lines a little bit wrong. But there's something in there for me, and I quite like the look of him, to be honest with you. But then my 2 defenders, Peter, do you agree with either of these in terms of ones to watch?
Yeah, I like both of them actually. Fun fact: we mentioned Serie B before. I did actually watch Douglas Mendes because he debuted under, I think it's Helio Dos Anjos at Ponte Preta.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised he got loaned back to to Brazil eventually, because at the time he was just making like his first steps in senior football. It wasn't anything too big, so it was very impressive to me when they sold him eventually to Salzburg, even if he did get loaned, because for them to scout through, it just shows that there's a very big scouting network there in Brazil already instilled. So I like the pick. I feel he was already highly touted when I remembered him there. So I was keen to
Hmm.
see when he got back to Bragantino to see how he gets on, whether he starts regularly and so on and so on. So yeah, I agree with both picks. I like them, to be honest, a lot, a lot.
And we've seen how quickly like these players can move. Like Murillo, like only had 20-25
Yeah.
games for the senior team before he moved across. So like one good season for Mendes here, and you don't know where he's going to end up. So look, one to watch. We've spoken about defenders for too long now. People want to go into the more attacking players. That's what
Yeah.
people want. But we're going to slowly work our way up and go through to our midfielders. Peter, who's your first midfielder you want to shout about on the pod?
Well, to be honest, I will probably go like deep into attackers, anyways, because my midfield is actually two tens, so nothing surprising there.
I'm definitely gonna rein it in with one or two of my picks,
Yeah.
but yeah, we'll go further pitch and then we'll
So
come back.
my number one pick is obviously Bruno Zapelli from again Atletico Paranaense. I tried not to choose
Hmm.
two players from the same squad, and yet I just wanted to go with him because last year he did have Vitor Roque up front, and he got brought in, and there was a bit of a settling period and so on and so on with him. But you can tell there was potential there. You really could, at Brazil level especially. However, this year I feel like now the burden is a bit more on him, and there's so much talent in there that I feel he made a very correct jump to go to Brazil. And as much as maybe some could argue that, yes, I agree. I feel it was a good move for him, and if he nails this stint right now for Pronenza as probably their main attacking output, well, not in terms of just goals and assists, but you get what I mean, like the creative focal point, he will likely earn a move to Europe. Maybe not top tier moves to Europe, but people forget that even a club like Benfica, a club like Porto, still a great move from like South America to wherever, and
Definitely.
it's then that you develop. He's really very technical. I love exactly that, the technicality in him. The creativity is one thing, but the technicality on him. He's a very elegant player, and the way he glides past the opponent sometimes, and then he looks like takes a look up, sees the pass, tries to play it in. Those are the things I really adore in a player when it comes to like playmaking ability. And Zappelli's got that. It's just about elevating it now. He's still 22, I believe, or will be 22 this year, which he's still young. He's under 23, so there's still room
Yeah,
to grow and develop for him. And it's exactly that. Just take the leap, take the jump, and just have more responsibility. Because I feel everything is there for him to succeed. And my second pick is one I know people rave about, Victor Hugo, and you're probably going to get to that as well. But my pick is actually again a Flamengo player, but this time it's Loran, who I've kind of been high on for the past 2 years just because of all the copinhas that he's kind of played in, despite being I think 17, and he's just been the mainstay in Flamengo's youth academies for so long that he's been a big name. It's just that there were numerous other players ahead of him. We all know that Flamengo is a very financially strong team, so they can always buy the big names, but they do look to bring in youth players here and there. And I feel like Uran, despite being, I believe,
yeah,
181 centimeters or something of sorts, people would expect him to be one of those Thomas Muller, maybe types of tens where he just looks to exploit space, but he's not that. He's very actually he's a very direct player. He looks to dribble. He tries to take people on. He does these flicks and the disrespectful thing where he just bounces the ball on his head or tries to do a couple of other tricks and just to humiliate you, which especially for his size and physicality, when it comes to youth level, he kept doing that. Like the moment he grew and grew, it just became more and more evident. So people were like, yeah, look at this kid. And now that he's come into getting a little bit more senior minutes, he obviously can't do that at the same level, but there's still promise there. You can see it. It's just about the one thing I feel is that now that Gabi Barbosa has a suspension and Flamengo are pretty much reliant solely as a sole strike on Pedro,
yeah.
he's probably not just Loran, but other youngsters and wingers are probably going to get shoved into a similar role where there's not a clear cut striker and it's all about movement and bringing other people into play. And Loran, despite obviously not being a striker for position, he could fit there. He could fit in the number 10 for someone else to slide in the striker role. And he could exploit that in a very good way. And I feel that's why I'm so excited to see how this all unfolds. Because for me, he's a very promising youngster that can make the jump. It's, again, just simply about where his potential could lead him. Because for years now, like for I think a good 2 years, people have been banging on about him. Like, just wait until he comes into the senior team, and I hope he gets the chances. He even gets placed at right wing sometimes. So uh,
Yeah, and it could be the perfect time. Like I said, I completely forgot about Gabigol and his suspend. How long is his suspension
I
again? It's
believe
at least a season or two, isn't
two.
it?
I believe it's 2 years. He's
Yeah,
appealing it, but I think he's not going to get away with like six to at least 1 month. 1 year. Sorry.
yeah, exactly. So he's out. It's almost perfect timing. Like you said, we've been waiting for Laurent to get his chance. And he got an assist in the last Libertadores game against Palestino. I don't think it was the best of corners, but it still goes down. And that would have done his confidence the world of good. And that's what I really like about for Flamengo. And we can compare it to UK, for UK listeners, we can compare it to Man City in a way in terms of like the stature of the club out there, but they still integrate. And obviously, I'm definitely going to get onto a player in a minute. They still integrate young youth players in and make sure that there's at least sort of 3 or 4 in and around the squad. And yes, more likely that they are sold to a European club. And obviously that's just how it works at the moment with the South American, the European relationship. But it's just refreshing to see that they don't just buy Galacticos or big stars and like dismiss their youth academy. Like the youth academy is so good. And like you said, we've been talking about Laurent or waiting for his opportunity for so long. But what a ridiculous statement because he's 17. And like we've been talking about him for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it? How like we're looking at South American talent even younger than ever before, really. But perfect opportunity. Gabigol suspended for X, Y, and Z, which we won't go into on this podcast. But it offers an opportunity for Laurent to come in, like you said. That yes, Pedro's going to start down the middle, but options in and behind where more fluidity to that role could suit him down to a T.
Which reminds me, you're going to get to a
Yes.
certain someone. So please share your
Mm-hmm.
midfielders now, and
Yeah.
may the public applaud.
I've got one. I'm gonna pretty much feel like I'm speaking on Cal's behalf for one of the players, but I'll get onto him in a minute because we're talking about Flamengo, so I can't not talk about Victor Hugo. I've made so much noise about him. I've wrote articles about him. I spoke about him on previous podcasts. I just love him. I don't understand why Chi-Chi's only playing him at the moment for like 10, 15 minutes, drip feeding him in. He's sort of in a battle with either Jesus in terms of like who's actually going to get the minutes out of those two. And I'd say similar positions. I disagree. We spoke on the podcast before
Yeah.
about Flamengo and like what they do with youngsters, and like Matthias Franco was the perfect example. Like there's so much talent there, but we don't know his position. And at the time, he probably needed to leave Flamengo because it was really toxic. Yet he's come across to Europe without having a position, and it's not really worked out for him just yet. So I almost feel like there needs to be a position nailed down. Victor Hugo is still able to be molded into whatever you want him to be. Now, don't forget that he won the Libertadores and performed really well under Dorival Jr., who was a huge fan of his, who's now obviously leading the Brazilian national team. And Victor Hugo started out as a left back for youth, moved into a number 6, and has progressed into a number 8, to be honest with you. And I think it really works in that Flamengo side because, as you just spoke about with that fluidity and that approach, he has that sort of free license in the final third. He's really good at picking up the ball, travelling into the spaces, has a long stride. He saw his first couple of goals in the Libertadores when he was playing last season. Jorge Sampaoli, like very much a Marmite manager, but he liked Hugo and he did play him and did give him chances. And he scored against Racing and then he scored against Orcas, I believe it was. So a couple in the Libertadores. And that both of his goals there showed he was a danger inside the box and willing to run and carry on and support players when he was like 20, 30 yards behind play. He was keen to show something, an appetite in a final third. And for me, there was just so many attributes which can't be dismissed. And I think Wolves were interested or did put a bid in, I believe, in not last window, the one before that. They brought in João Gomez, and I think they probably went to João Gomez and plays obviously more as a number 6. And they may have looked at Danilo, went to Forest and went, hang on, we want a number 8. Flamengo, what have you got? And Victor Hugo is probably the obvious one. So, look, he needs more minutes. Chi-Chi is very much this is my 11. Maybe I'm a little bit worried about Laurent as well, the more I think about it, in terms of Chi-Chi is very much like, this is my trusted 11 and I don't want to rotate too much. But however stubborn you are, we spoke about the Brazilian calendar, and it's just so demanding that rotations will need to happen. And Victor Hugo will get his chance. Iger Jesus will get his chance. Lauren will get his chance. And they're all like huge talents for Flamengo. And they're learning from the best, right? He's going to be playing alongside Pulgar, who's a great Chilean international. And then you've got obviously Nicolas de la Cruz. So there's so much talent to learn from before you go across. And these are players who probably could still perform in Europe, definitely De La Cruz. So it's not like you're making a huge step up when you do move across. So look, he's only 19. A year or two, whether it's under Chichi or not, we'll wait and see. But one I really do like. Now the second one, Cal isn't here, but I feel like I need to represent him whilst he's in Istanbul, because he's the one. If anyone who's been joining us from Series 1, we've been talking about Andre non-stop. And then at one point when it looked like he was off to Europe, but we're trying to find the answer for the next Andre to talk about. And he put Juan Sforza on our radars was it about 6 months ago now in the group chat or something?
Pretty much.
About that. And I've not really watched him before, and I've just taken closer looks at him, and I've tried to compare a few of his stats to Andre. So I'm going to read out a few things here from my endless list of notes around him, because he's such an exciting talent, and he's just moved across from Newell's Old Boys across to Vasco. And I think maybe it seemed a little bit disappointing at first, but I think it is the step in the right direction. And this could be a huge year. So they spent 4.6 million euros on him. Now, they lost or sold Marlon Gomez to Shakhtar. So it's the perfect replacement in terms of he's going to come straight in. He's going to be the main man in the middle of the park for Ramon Diaz, who pretty much came into the fold when Vasco looked like they were going to get relegated last season and saved them. He's a really intelligent manager. I'm just going to go off topic here a little bit, because here's one for you. I was looking at Ramon Diaz a little bit closer. Right, so he's managed River, Argentina, Paraguay, Botafogo, San Lorenzo. So big team. So he's a well-established manager, and I think he'll do good things for Vasco and he'll keep them up. But he also managed Oxford United for a season, which, there you go. If anyone goes to a pub quiz and that pops up, there's one for you, which is really random. But back to Sforza. What a player he is in terms of, if you watch him play, his vision is exceptional. Left-footed midfielder who just strokes the ball into dangerous areas, whether he's dropping deep and spreading it like Steven Gerrard used to do back in the day, or operating in a crowded final third. He seems to just float the ball at the right height into dangerous areas. He's the assist before the assist. So if you actually look at his stats, then he's not really going to be offering too much in terms of goals, because that's not his job. He's more of a number 6. But he likes to operate further up the pitch and get onto the ball. And Vasco really need a player like that. So I feel like they're in for. I think they could surprise a few people this season. I don't think they're going to be battling in amongst relegation. And if they've got someone like that on the ball week in, week out, it can drive them into the top half of the table or in or around there. But I think this could be a sort of a one season wonder, or maybe 18 months before he's eventually moving across to Europe. I completely agree with Cal, everything he said about his player. He's a huge one to watch. But what really impressed me was looking at his stats across 2024 compared to where he was 2023, in Argentina, and looking at Andre's stats for 2023. I got there in the end. His ball recovery rate was higher than Andre's. And I know we're comparing different leagues, but that was really impressive. Yeah. That stood out to me. I was very impressed by that. And that was the main one. You can go in deeper. His passing accuracy was pretty standard, to be honest. It was in around 85% in his own half, 80% less, which was sort of just a bit less than Pablo Maya and Andre. But the fact that his ball recovery was higher than Andre's was a really impressive statistic. And with Vasco being a side who probably are going to be having to put in the dirty work a little bit at times against the top 6 sides, he's the perfect player to be in there. And I think a lot of teams will take note of him. So one to get really excited about. I know we've gone further down the pitch because you were talking about number 10s and I've brought it back to a number 6. And I feel like this podcast is all about number 6s anyway. It seems to be the position we get most excited about.
That's true.
It's all we talk about is defensive midfielders. Maybe we need to switch up these tactics for this podcast to grow. But look, let's move across to attackers then. If we haven't lost people at the half an hour mark, let's talk a few attacking players. I've got mainly mine are wingers, to be honest with you. There is one striker I want to keep my eye on, but I'm going to pass over to you first, see who you have lined up for us.
Yeah, well, one's a bit of a throwback pick because I just loved him when he was at Palmeiras, but I'll keep that to myself for a second. The number one I chose actually is Wesley from Corinthians. He's
Hmm.
one that I feel Corinthians right now are very poor side. They've never actually, for the past couple of years, they've never really struck me as a really strong side, anyways. And
Yeah.
they have, on the flip side of it though, they keep churning out these nice little youth players that kind of come up out of nowhere and then boom,
Yeah.
suddenly because of the need, like they're not very good financially, I believe as well. And because of the need to kind of integrate youth players in the sense like Flamengo does, but without the money, they
Hmm.
keep putting in these youngsters that are just very, very impressive. I know people were obviously were initially hyped about Guilherme Biro, and granted, he's still got time to develop. He's not a lost cause. This is not me saying anything against it. But Wesley's one that has come in, and I feel people are much more excited about him. And I believe it's the directness in him. He's when you compare the styles of the two, I feel they're really different. Like Wesley is a more direct player. He doesn't exactly do the typical Brazilian thing of over dribbling in the sense where he just focuses on how to beat his man. What he just wants is to get past his opponent and then use that right foot to cut inside, shoot, pass, cross. Depends on where the case is and where like the position he's occupied. So he's come in on limited time and he's already been very impressive. Like, there's not been too much of him that I would say is negative. There is room for development, absolutely, but that's the beauty of it. He's still 18, so exactly that. He's right where Guilherme Biro was about a year and a half ago, when he was kind of being introduced into the side and being touted as the next big thing.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad you said that because
yeah,
I was almost when you said it was only 18 because I was about to go. He's played a few games this season, came in last season, and he hasn't really stepped up scoring wise. But yes, he's playing in a poor Corinthian side. I'm only saying that because a lot of people you see it across Twitter as soon as someone sees a clip of a young player in Brazil, they go in. I've seen like the next Mbappe and stuff like
yeah,
that. Like, let's all calm down a second. He's scored like one goal, but in the one or two goals he has scored, they've been like
bangers,
unreal, and it's been
bangers.
like wow. But he just 100% bangers. But he just needs to bring that more to the table. Whether he's
Yeah,
going to do that for Corinthians or his next move, I don't know. Because, like you said, they don't look like they're going to be strong, and they look like they're going to be battling relegation again. To be honest with you, but yeah, I do agree with you. There is something there. I didn't know for me whether I was just getting excited because there was a bit of hype on Twitter around him after I've watched him. So I've watched him going, okay, he's played quite well here, but another game with no goals or assists before he's been pulled off. And then you go on Twitter and everyone's like, the next Mbappe, look at his pace, his little clips. And then you go, have I missed something here?
no, not at
But I
all,
agree, look, he's
not
only
at all,
18, right?
not at all. To be
Yeah.
honest, I was just going to add that he's if you ever imagine a winger going to Porto, it's Wesley. Honestly, like if he carries on like this
Yeah, you're
in a
probably
year's
right.
time, I
Yeah.
see him at Porto with a 75 mil release clause and Chelsea banging on about him in a year's time. Like, honestly, like
Yeah.
it's gonna happen because to me he's just the directness in him. Like he's a no nonsense winger type. Yes, he's the new type of wingers where it's all about cutting inside, nothing about keeping to the byline, all about having an overlapping fullback and so
Mm.
on and so on. But that direct style is what sets him apart. Like it makes him more dangerous because he doesn't look to
Yeah.
like when you talk about Loran, that's completely different. He wants to humiliate you in a sense. Wesley is more about, yeah, okay, I'm going to beat you and then I'm going to shoot. That's it. Or try and make something dangerous. And that's great because when he gets the shot volume in, then maybe we see much more of him on the stat sheet rather than right now. But yeah. And my number two is Gabriel Veron, who, when he went to Porto a couple of years ago, I was very excited because he was one a little tricky winger, maybe sometimes number
Hmm.
10, depending, and very good close control, nice dribbling. It's just the he plays on the edge of it, everything. He tries to grab games by the scruff of the neck. Yes, he's inconsistent, but that was because he was young, obviously. And I feel like every Brazilian winger, when he makes his way into Serie A, he's always initially inconsistent. Like it's the consistency thing that has to come into his play.
Mm.
But when he joined Porto, I felt like yes, great move. Like that's the move. Like he was initially touted for much bigger clubs than Porto, and I was saying he's not ready for this. He shouldn't go anywhere else. Like he shouldn't. He should go to a team that's ready to develop him. But I feel injuries have set him back, and now he's back at Cruzeiro on loan, and it's a great move because I think last year Mateus Pereira was there from where was it in Saudi Arabia, I believe, or one of those teams. I don't really
Hmm.
remember. I think it's actually the United Arab Emirates, but it's my mistake. So he was back. He didn't impress. Other wingers also didn't kind of impress. And I feel now he has already had injuries. I believe he tore a thigh muscle in the regionals. I may be wrong there. Don't quote me on that. But he did have injuries already when coming into Cruzeiro. But
Mm.
now for the past 2 games, he's being introduced. He's trying to be eased in. And I feel with time, if he gets back into that pace that he was initially with Palmeiras, yes, injuries have set him back. Yes, developmentally, he's stalled a little bit. He could be a great winger still, especially at Brazil level. And I love him. I just every time I see a little tricky winger, I'm just so excited because those are the types of players
This
that
is the most excited I've ever seen you on the
you. I
podcast.
told you you're in my waters now. It's just they keep you on the edge of your seat. It's just that
Mm.
normal. Like you always see. I love defenders. I love midfielders. Everything about football, I love obviously. But it's the wingers that kind of bring out the natural love for the game because they bring out 100% of what you want to see if they're good enough, obviously. Um, so he was one of those. I'm not saying he's obviously Ronaldinho reincarnated. Don't get me wrong, but he's a great young player that has all the tools because of all the speed, because of that said close control and so on. He could always be dangerous, even in games he's not as impactful as expected. And as such, I feel he might get his career back on track with Cruzeiro. So those are my 2 picks, and I'm keen to hear yours if I'm honest.
Yeah, I'm surprised you didn't go to the obvious choices here in terms of Esteval,
They'll come. They'll
Dion.
come.
They'll
They're on the
come.
closing words.
Okay, yeah, we'll
Honorable
close some words
mentions.
with
Honorable
that.
mentions. I did want to say Luis Guilherme initially because I feel Esteval has taken all the spotlight out of him, and for Palmeiras, I think they've now been in a situation where they just bring in good youth players and they're very, very, very good, and they just need time. And Abel Ferreira has actually made them he's eased him in the perfect way. Maybe he didn't do it with Hendrick, but now with Estevao in the way and with Luis Guilherme as well, I think he's introducing them more and more and more, and he just waits for the opportunity for them to shine and be given the starter spot. And that's actually admirable. I know Estevao's grabbed all the spotlight, but Luis Guilherme is a great
Yeah,
little
yeah,
player.
yeah, for sure. I honestly think though he's learnt a valuable lesson because he nearly threw away the title last season by being stubborn and not playing Hendrick. And the fact that he wasn't playing him was because he was saying, "Oh, he was so young. I wanted to protect him," and I get that. But he got to the point where he was like, "This kid's too good to not play,"
Yeah.
and now obviously he's almost paved the way for the two mentioned there, and like obviously all the attention's on Esteval and almost rightly so. But then Guilherme, like there's been links with Liverpool, and like he's in 6 months' time there's going to be plenty more, isn't there? But it's going to be great to see those three before Hendrick moves across to Real Madrid. So look away from sort of the hipster, edgier picks that we're throwing at you today on this podcast. Go and watch Palmeiras for the next 6 months because we won't
Please
see
do.
it ever again.
Please do.
Now, I'm going to drop it really from the level of Esteval and co, but there's two players I want to get excited about. First one, I do like Alisson Santana from Mineiro. I think the fact that he's a left-footed winger who is tall, agile, likes to cut in, isn't afraid to shoot, sort of similar to Wesley in a way you described it to me in terms of not doing anything too fancy or over the top. Now, he's going to get some game time this season. Yes, Mineiro have got your front three of Hulk, Paulinho, Gustavo Scarpa, and you could say his time's going to be limited. But look, we've already spoken about how busy the schedule is, and learning under Gustavo Scarpa, like arguably what the league's best player over the last 4 or 5 years consistently, he's going to be playing in that similar position. Plenty to learn from. And then look at the manager who's coming in, Gabi Milito, like what an unreal manager for Mineiro to get. All of a sudden he's come in, and look, I am going to blow my own horn. I did say that they were going to be strong in the Libertadores and in the title. I couldn't help myself, but the fact that they got in Milito as well has elevated them, and everyone thinks that they're going to perform really well. And like he's had a couple of chances in the Libertadores. I think if he started against Caracas, where he's obviously going to get more game time against inferior opposition, but he's only 18. I think like a move to Europe could be on the cards at some point. But I think he's in the right environment with good players around him in his position to learn from. And Paulinho, yeah, he's only 23, but what a season he had, and his versatility across the line can really help him out because Santana, yes, he likes to operate on the wing, but there's no reason why he can't adapt to playing in a number 10 role. And Paulinho can sort of teach him lessons from that. And as can Hulk, right? If you're going to learn from anyone above Scarpa, you're going to be looking towards him. So I think that's a really good opportunity for him this season, and with Monero like going to be competing across all fronts or into last stages of the competition, he could be one to keep an eye on. And if we're going to stick with wingers, Nathan Fernandez, I think you brought him up on the last podcast, I believe, Gremio's striker come left winger, depends where you look at under 20s, he stood out playing directly through the middle. Opportunities in the senior team have come more on the flanks. Now, Gremio, as we spoke about previously on the podcast, pretty much almost sold their front line from last season, and they've brought in Christian Pavon, they've got Soteldo on loan from Santos and Cristaldo in behind. Diego Costa's obviously joined, but the line is a lot weaker than what it was last season, which creates opportunities for Fernandez. And like he started in the Libertadores away to the strongest. I think they took a reserve team because of a cup final they had on the state cups on the weekend. But this is where he'll get opportunities to shine. And he did perform really well in that game, considering it was at altitude and it was a makeshift 11. Yeah. It was a makeshift 11 of youngsters and reserve players, but he stood out by a mile. And like only being 19 years of age with similar sort of age players, like it was him who was like trying to make things happen, and he just looks a lot more composed in possession and wanting to get on the ball, had all the right signs to make things work. So you flagged him before, so I won't take all the credit for him, but I think he's going to be a really exciting player to watch. But I will offer up a striker. I'm going to offer in an additional player. I know we're doing 2 of each, but we have time to talk on the podcast. And actually, it sounds like I'm really missing Cal, doesn't it? But what I keep bringing him up. But on the second ever episode of the Copper Club podcast, I said one to watch was going back to Vasco, and he's now turned 17. He was 16 at the time. Rayan Vitor rather. Only 17 years of age, and he's actually getting game time for Vasco this season, which is really promising. He's getting, I think he got 45 minutes. Who did they play last night? I can't remember. Bragantino got 45 minutes against Bragantino. I think it was like 35 minutes in round 1, which is a really promising start to the season for him. 17, he is physical, he is built, he knows where the goal is. I think Real Madrid were scouting him when we spoke about him 2 series ago, or they were like at least looking at him, which is an indication of where his ceiling could be. So look, and the fact that he's got Juan Sforza in behind picking him out, like what a lovely sort of connection that could potentially be for the rest of the season. So yeah, that's definitely one to keep an eye on. Really excited. Hopefully get some game time. I did have a wild card pick down, but I can't remember exactly who. You've got 2. Yeah, you go ahead and find them while I'm trying to figure out. Someone else.
I also mentioned from Gremio, they always do this. I don't know how they do it, but they always pop up with some odd youth player that actually has a really, really high ceiling. And the other one that I'm going to mention is obviously Gustavo Nunes. He's been getting minutes recently, and I feel he's a little bit egoistical. Don't get me wrong, but he's a very, in the sense to use the slang term, techie winger. One similarly to Gustavo, to Gabriel Veron, where he could always keep you at the edge of your seat. And the other one is I have mentioned him before. I believe it was Kawa Elias from Fluminense, and it's just because if John Kennedy doesn't grab his chances, trust me, Kawa Elias will. This you said about Ryan knowing where the goal is. This guy knows the goal and much more. Like he's such a natural finisher. If he gets given the chance and takes it, he's the next big thing from Brazil in terms of strikers. But I'm putting my name on the spotlight right now. If I ever get this wrong, you can fire me. But it's just I feel so confident in him just because I've seen him at the youth level, and he's been banging in goals there for. It only goes to show that he's 17 and he's already technically the understudy of Herman Cano, right? I know John Kennedy's there, but he's more of a different profile compared to him.
Well, yes and no, because he started getting game time over John Kennedy. Like we were talking before the start of the season saying this is John Kennedy's season, but with the introduction of Marquinhos on loan from Arsenal, John Kennedy's not really getting a sniff at the moment, which is so odd. But then this is presenting an opportunity to Elias, who you're talking about there, in terms of like this is his opportunity to shine. So yeah, I actually agree with you. I'm glad that you're the one who's made the big statement, but I do agree with you in terms of his ceiling looks ridiculously high. The player I have on my list, which I can sign off with, is a player who I've barely seen play at all. So I'm not going to go into any detail about it, but it just caught my eye when I was doing a little bit of last minute research. So I'm going to go all the way back to International. We spoke about him a little bit today, right at the beginning of the podcast, but Gustavo Prado, 18 years of age, central midfielder, started playing 15, 20 minutes here and there. And I haven't seen him play, to be honest with you. I just think he's one to flag. So this isn't me claiming to know anything about him, but I'm just going to drop something in there because Internacional, as we said at the start of the podcast, have spent an awful lot of money, but he got 25 minutes away to Palmeiras the other day, which they won 1-0. So I think that's really important. So hopefully we get to watch him over the next few weeks and we can talk about him a bit more in detail on the podcast. But when a team who should be fighting for the top 6 in Brazil start randomly dropping in an 18-year-old who we've barely even seen or known about, you have to take note. And I feel like that's a really good place to leave the podcast. So we've gone through players, ones to watch, and we're finishing with a player we haven't seen, but we will do very soon. Now, before we sign off, I just want to say that our Copa America previews will continue long into the summer, just before the tournament starts. We've already covered Brazil with the Elastico and Argentina with Tom Robinson. Go and check them out. They're available across Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, as will this podcast be. Our domestic podcast isn't going anywhere. Cow's in Turkey, but don't worry, Peter and I will hold the fort. Peter, thank you very much for your picks. Pleasure to speak to you once again. And yeah, for those watching on YouTube, Peter is showing the magazine. We're down to our final 3 or 4 already. It's ridiculous.
Please order.
Sold them all already.
It's amazing.
So by the time this podcast goes out, we may not have it. Thanks for your kind words, Peter. Pleasure to have you on and speak to you very soon.
Always. Thanks for having me on. See you.